Thanks to Windows on the World.
Bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories on tonight's show.
This is the location of author J.M. Allen, or Jim Allen's Atlantis in the Andes. And 12,000 plus years ago, this was all water below me. Lake Titicaca was 10 times the size it is now. All that remains now is a little bit of Lake Po'opo there. But what's fascinating about this place is that you can see it's in the high altiplano of Bolivia. Everything's flat. But here we have 3 concentric rings going around this mountaintop here. And that is consistent with Plato's concept of the city, not the continent, the city of Atlantis. Also, Plato talked about that Atlantis had 3 different colors of stone: red, black, and white. That's exactly what we find here.
So, Brien Foerster, welcome back to Windows on the World.
Thank you very much, Mark.
So I've just been looking at some of your recent videos. It's been quite some time since you were on the show, and we talked about the Paracas region and the Paracas people. These some new videos you've put up. One is called Atlantis in the Andes, and it's based on an Atlantean theory. And there's this guy called Jim Allen who's written a book, Atlantis in the Andes. And this does tie in broadly with your research. So can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, actually, Jim Allen has written 4 books about this topic. And the interesting thing about him is that he was a cartographer in the RAF. And so if anyone is good at reading the ground or studying maps, it's him. And he discovered that there was an area south of Lake Titicaca in Bolivia whose dimensions were incredibly similar to the city of Atlantis, not the continent, but the city itself. And so he spent more than a decade now studying the site, relating it to the proportions of Atlantis, the characteristics of Atlantis, etc. And as I say, he's written 4 books about it, and I was able to go there, I guess it was a few months ago, to check the site out for myself.
Yeah, can you just give us a bit more of how this ties into your work with this Atlantean theory? Because you've been to a lot of these megalithic sites and some the megalithic and the Inca sites. How does this Atlantean theory fit in, if at all?
Well, actually, it was mainly the timeline that is the most interesting, because Atlantis supposedly, collapsed about 11,600 years ago, and that ties in very well with the timeline that we're looking at in terms of our belief that the megalithic structures are somewhere in the region of 12,000 plus years ago. And so that's the main thing that caught my interest, and also the fact that it's somewhat in an area where other megalithic works are. And I've seen a number of photographs and short videos of the Atlantis in the Andes, but you honestly have to go there yourself in order to see, with your own eyes and experience as to whether it actually does relate to anything else, and if in fact it is that ancient.
Yes, and of course we're talking about Lake Titicaca has shrunk quite considerably, and so how does that tie in with what you've found?
Well, that's actually, most people don't know that about 12,000 plus years ago, Lake Titicaca was about 10 times the size it is now. And there was an upthrust from north to south of the altiplano area, and caused this huge lake to drain down to the size it is now. It was actually all seawater 12,000 years ago, and all the residual salt has developed the largest salt flat in the world in an area called Uyuni. And so this little hill that is the site of the Atlantis in the Andes would have in fact been an island about 12,000 years ago.
Can you tell us what we would expect to find in this area as far as these megalithic remains go?
Well, the most interesting thing is that the Altiplano area is very flat, except mountains on the left and right sides as you head south. So you can see that it's a giant basin that originally was an inland sea, and there are a few mountains that rise up, one of them being where the Atlantis in the Andes site is. As well, there are 3 concentric rings that are at different elevations on this hill, and those rings correspond with what Plato described as being the city of Atlantis. Also, Plato talked about the fact that there were 3 colors of stone at Atlantis, which were white, red, and black, which we find at Jim Allen's site. There's an ancient mine just to the south, which produced what is called orichalcum, which is a complex metal. It's a mix of gold and copper and silver and tin, and it's a natural occurring metal of that composition, and that also is something that that Plato described.
Well, that's really interesting because there's so many different Atlantean theories, but this one seems to have some real facts and practical evidence. Is that what you're saying here, that it ties in with your research as well?
I would say on some levels. Another interesting thing is that Plato supposedly says that beyond the Pillars of Hercules, you will find this great landmass called Atlantis. And when you go beyond the Pillars of Hercules, they kind of, in some ways, point to South America. South America has been referred to in the past as being called originally Atlantis because it was the Atlantic continent, the Atlantic Ocean. But the one thing is that we didn't find any megalithic remains at all there, so that was a bit of a disappointment. But we did find ancient pottery, signs that there were temples on this once island, and so clearly it was a place of homage in the past. The question is, how far in the past?
That's the big question, isn't it? Because a lot of these timelines get very, very wobbly once we get past a few thousand years, and you've been looking into this for quite some time. So this idea of a global catastrophe, a global flood, this is also something you've been looking into. Can you tell us a bit how that fits into your research generally, with what you found?
Well, the timeline does fit in because we do know there was a global catastrophic event about 12,000 years ago, which ended the rapid end of the last ice age, causing the world's oceans to rise by more than 300 feet or 100 meters by some estimates in the course of weeks, not thousands of years. So all that change in ice becoming water would have created incredible pressure on the Earth itself. This shifting of mass, and that could easily have caused major volcanic eruptions, etc. Because there are ancient stories of there being these ancient creator beings that brought the world back into a state of order, created the moon, the sun, and the stars. But what that could actually mean is that since there would have been a lot of volcanic debris floating in the atmosphere after this event of about 12,000 years ago, that the sky could have become blackened for a long period of time, and you couldn't see the sun, stars, or the moon, and therefore they did reappear. That would be like not the creation of them, but like the the recreation or the return of them. So in terms of timeline, it does fit the events in other places that we've been looking at, not only in South America, but also in Egypt as well.
Yes, you've done quite a lot of work in Egypt. Maybe we could just briefly go into that as well, as you've just mentioned it. You've done quite a lot of exploration, not just in Giza, but around many of the sites there. Can you tell us what your impressions are, how this fits in historically with your research?
Well, Akhenaten is probably the most fascinating of all the pharaohs because he was called a heretic by the Amaya priesthood, who actually had complete power. By the time of the birth of Akhenaten, he had basically zero power or abilities as a pharaoh, and that's why he revolted against this priesthood, because he was a member of one of the secret schools of ancient Egypt thought. And so what he decided to do, contrary to what some people believe, who think that he created monotheism, he actually returned Egypt back into the state of monotheism, where there was one creator, rather than hundreds, if not thousands, of these little gods of having birds' heads and human bodies, etc. And so we actually went to the site of his capital, because he moved his entire capital from Thebes, where it had been for a long time, to this area which to the city that he built from scratch called Kataten. And so when we visited the area, we found out that in fact it wasn't virgin terrain that he chose. He knew that there had been an ancient civilization that lived there previously. And we found definite evidence of that because we entered into different chambers and tunnel systems that had clearly been cut out using some form of lost ancient high technology. So Akhenaten was very intelligent in that he brought back this ancient concept of Aten, which means the full flowering of civilization. And for his city, he chose a very ancient location, which he called Atataten. So that was quite intriguing. The very sad thing about the area is that the Amun priesthood schemed against him because they were losing power. And so they decided to murder him and Nefertiti and the entire family. And they razed the city all the way to the ground. So there's almost nothing left of what was once a very grand, massive Egyptian capital city.
Yes, and there's this theory about that these ancient mystery schools were involved with this secret brotherhood of the snake, which seems to have gone across many cultures. This may seem a little bit off topic, but does it actually tie in with anything you found in South America?
Yeah, there are many cultures where snake or serpent is a very important character. Destroyed basically by Christianity. But in older cultures than the Christian culture, you do have the snake as being a symbol or a giver of wisdom, and that's also what we find in South America. The book I'm writing right now is called The Plumed Serpent, and it is about a number of different cultures that talk about a great ancient teacher or teachers that were bearded, and they were called, each one, whether in Peru or Bolivia or Central America, Mexico, is called the plumed serpent. And symbolically, what that seems to mean is that, at least in South America, you have three animal characters that are very important. You have the serpent, the puma, and the condor. The serpent represents the subconscious, the puma conscious, and the condor the superconscious aspects of the mind. And so when you combine the concept of the plume, which is the bird, and the serpent, which is the snake, you get the connection of super and subconscious, which is what a meditative state is. So it seems each culture seems to be describing possibly the same character as being highly mentally and spiritually evolved and arrived as a great teacher.
Yes, that just brings us into one of your videos actually I was watching, titled Megalithic Snake Temple in Lake Titicaca, Bolivia. And these just appear to be like megalithic ruins. Could you tell us a bit about that site that you've been to?
Yeah, it's very difficult to get to, and almost nobody knows, knows anything about it. Including we had to go very much to find the place, and when we were able to hire a local taxi driver, he didn't know where it was. So I kind of used tuition on it, and we basically drove past the site where I saw a very large megalithic stone sitting in a field. And as we explored the area, we found a perimeter wall made up of megalithic blocks, including a freestanding, very large sculpture of a coiled snake.
Buenas tardes.
¿Cómo está?
Gusto
de saludarlo.
Hemos estado en Año Nuevo Aymara, creo, juntos aquí, ¿no?
Ajá.
En la...
Acá en Quito.
Definitely megalithic, and the stone does not look like it's local because we've driven several miles and we've seen where they've excavated for the road itself, and this material is not there. Not big chunks of stone of this size, so obviously, like many megalithic sites, the stone was brought here on purpose from another location. Now we get the perspective from my quadcopter, Phantom Vision 2 Plus, great little toy. And the local villagers came out in droves to look at it because they'd never seen anything like it. As you can see, the excavation is quite minor, but this was probably the central ceremonial area. Much of the site has been ravaged by time, and also local villagers taking the big stones, breaking them up, and building their own houses out of. This is not something that just happens in Bolivia, but happens all over the world when a site has been abandoned, probably for thousands of years, and is no longer recognized for its special nature. But that's what's, again, great about having a quadcopter, in that you're able to see a much greater perspective of what a site like this looks like. If you visit, please give the mayor a donation. So the stone appears to be sandstone, and the tool marks would appear to be hand tool marks. But it's an exceptional thing to not discover, but to explore. And this is some other kind of stone. Obviously it's a snake. You can see how the spiral goes, comes up here. The black part was exposed before, and it's only recently been excavated.
He says that you have the mission to let the world know this place with your films.
Yes.
Él dice que perfecto.
Me parece que son vestigios de una antigua civilización de la época de Cristo, ¿no? Donde aquí había una civilización de pueblos guerreros, los hombres Qatari, ¿no? Que tenían rivalidad con otros pueblos, ¿no? Entonces es una fortaleza antigua.
He believes that this was part of the Bible also, you know, the very antiques, and they have rivalities with people around the place. So I'm going to say again, they are happy that we're going to show to the world these monuments.
Do they know what culture did this?
¿Saben qué cultura exacta es? ¿No es tiwanaco?
No, es mucho más antiguo que Tiwanaku, en
¿Sí?
los tiempos de Cristo.
Yeah, it's more antique than Tiwanaku, maybe from the time of Christ. That's what he said.
Is the stone local, or was it brought here from somewhere else?
¿Esto siempre ha estado aquí o lo han traído de otro lugar?
Bueno, es un misterio esto, porque las piedras pesan más de arriba de 5 toneladas. Entonces no hay aquí lugares donde se puede extraer semejante piedra. O sea, no hay canteras, ¿no? Entonces es un misterio de dónde han traído las piedras, ¿no?
Yeah, it is a mystery from where they took these stones. So they believe they belong to here because they are from more than 4 tons each one. You know, so that's what he says, that is a mystery.
You seem to be now exploring the periphery of these more famous areas, and maybe we could also talk about this other video that you've done called Megalithic Evidence that Cusco Existed Before the Inca, which does kind of tie this up really with a lot of your work. Can you just tell us a bit about this area of Cusco?
Well, there's growing evidence that Cusco was a city prior to the existence of the Inca. It was actually a megalithic city, and we're talking several thousand years before the arrival of the Inca. So when the Inca left Lake Titicaca about 1,000 years ago, I believe that they knew where to go to, and that was this ancient abandoned megalithic city, which they call Cusco, and Cusco means the navel. So they had adopted that concept as being the navel of their world. It's a very energetic area, and there are many megalithic structures both above and below ground.
Temple sites, or what are called temple sites, often have this resonance which fits in with the original Schumann resonance, and it's very good for meditative states, and also that would imply getting to higher knowledge and possibly out-of-body experiences. How does that tie in with the sites that you've looked at? Because I've done quite a lot of interviews with you. It would be good to know what kind of what your impression of these sites are, and have you done any tests?
Well, about 2 years ago, we had a number of dowsers come with us, and we actually we traveled north to south, starting in Cusco, and went to a number of different megalithic sites, all the way down to the south end of Lake Titicaca, where you find Tiwanaku and Pumapunku. And so the dowsers were checking the energy at each one of these sites, and one of them even started mapping them. So as we traveled, he mapped the locations of these sites and the energy line that seemed to be running through them, and he found that it was basically a straight line, that all of these megalithic sites are basically on a straight line going from northwest to southeast, which in oral tradition is called path of Viracocha, Viracocha being the creator god. And so that was quite intriguing. The energy line appears to be more or less about 100 meters in diameter, and some of those that were with us believe that it doesn't actually travel in a straight line, but by lining up these megalithic structures with high quartz and feldspar content, and in some cases iron, that what they were doing was actually harnessing the energy by causing it to go from being wavy and snake-like to being more or less a straight line going through the structures.
We've talked about what are called ley lines. Ley lines were only named ley lines quite recently, really. And a lot of people just still think they're a theory. You know, it doesn't get very good traction in the mainstream press, but there is an indication that the geological aspect of these sites is very important. For instance, where there's fissures in the rock, these sites that have been built on were later used by the Christians as sites for their churches. Now that's very interesting, the way that would tie into South America. So have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, definitely. what we do know is that the Inca found these ancient sites and would establish their own complexes in a very nurturing way at these sites. They wouldn't disturb the megalithic works, they would build around them. And then later, of course, when the Spanish arrived, they quite often would build their own churches on top of these sites. The main one being the Coricancha, which was the spiritual center in Cusco, and that's where the first Catholic church was built, right on top. The Spanish, on purpose, tore down the Temple of the Sun, which was located there, and built their church on top in order to be able to program the local people into adopting Christianity. Also, Cusco is the center of or was the center of the Inca world, or the navel, and the actual navel of Cusco is the Coricancha, and right in the center of the Coricancha, there is a shaft that goes down that connects with a tunnel system that probably had running water, and that would be an energizing thing for the complex itself.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because that ties in really to pretty much everywhere where you find these Christian churches on these pagan sites, most of them very, very ancient. And I've experienced the different energies on these sites. So we are talking about a very real phenomenon here. And so how do we get over this conventional idea that you've been struggling against for years, that these ancient cultures were primitive, when we actually know that they were more advanced? Are you breaking that down more and more now?
Yeah, the more that we do tours in the area and attract people like engineers, sometimes stonemasons with us, then they can testify to the fact that the work that they are experiencing are in fact beyond 21st century technology. So it's not a question of an ancient people being advanced or as advanced as us. It's actually capabilities beyond what we're able to do today. Every single one of the engineers and masons will testify to that. Not one of them was convinced for a tenth of a second that the Inca or any other bronze culture could have achieved any of this work. It's simply impossible.
Yes, exactly. We've covered this many times on the show, and I think most people who listen to Windows on the World will know that with these sites, so we don't need to go into all of those. But something we talked about last time, which was the Paracas people, which seemed to be very anomalous with the elongated skulls and the dark auburn red hair. Have you done any more work on this or found anything out since we last spoke?
Actually, yours will be the first show to find out, Mark.
Well, that's
and
great.
That's we, excuse me, but yeah, we were able to have one sample of baby Paracas hair tested by a major laboratory in North America. And in the world, there are three kinds of hair. It's either Negroid or African, which when you take a cross-section is shaped like a kidney or a kidney bean. Then there's Asian, which also includes Native American, which is round, again, if you do a cross-section. And then Caucasian is oval. And so from this sample, the expert was able to deduce that the hair of this individual was a combination of Asian and Caucasian. And we're talking about someone who died 1,900 years ago.
I think we talked a while ago about this, and especially the Vikings, because they did have advanced knowledge, but where did they get it from? And with the origination of this red hair, which seems to be a Middle Eastern trait, not really Irish or Scottish, it's not really a Celtic trait originally. So this really ties into what we were talking about previously, about the migration patterns. Do you think they were native to that area originally?
No, and actually other hair samples are being sent to another laboratory for testing, and it shows that that the hair itself is natural red and is at least part Caucasian in ancestry, and we're not, when we say Caucasian, we're not simply saying European. Caucasian includes people of the Middle East, etc.
Yes.
And even probably Northern Africa, etc. So let's not get too hung up on them being necessarily someone like the Celts. But if this holds true, then that means that people, and especially the Paracas, have ancestry which is not fully from ancestry crossing the Bering Land Bridge, but clearly they would have had to have traveled by some kind of ship from another part of the world. And the more that we're working on this, the more we're believing that there is a Middle Eastern genetic connection.
Well, that would be very, very interesting to find out. Can you just describe the differences between the Paracas people and other people of the region?
Oh, sure. Well, the interesting thing about the Paracas is that they suddenly appear on the coast of Peru about 1000 BC. And it's unknown, even archaeologists who are honest will admit that they don't know where their ancestors came from. Any of the theories come up with so far, they were actually, the ancestry came from other parts of Peru, has been largely disproven. And then when you throw factors in, such as the fact that they had elongated skulls, very sophisticated pottery, very sophisticated textiles, auburn red hair, and they appear to be taller than the other people of the area, that I think you have no choice but to believe that originally they came from some other part of the world and reestablished themselves on the coast of Peru.
This is maybe a bit of a loose connection here, but you've done quite a lot of studying about Easter Island, and I think you mentioned that the moai, the statues there, could have been represented as being red-headed. Is that true?
That's true. I mean, if you ask the archaeologists in general, they'll say that the top knot that you see on the few of the statues that still have them on Easter Island, that top knot is actually a hat. But if you ask the local people, they say, no, that's red hair, because the people who came before the Polynesians were red-haired people, and that's local people admitting this. Also, there is a raft on its way to Easter Island right now, which is called the Kon-Tiki 2. So rather than Kon-Tiki, the original from the 1950s, simply wanted to see where the winds and currents would take the craft. This new Kon-Tiki 2 is trying to focus on going directly from the coast of Peru to Easter Island. And if they're able to do that, then they will have proven that ancient people could have used Easter Island as a stopping off point between the west coast of South America and Polynesia, and then from Polynesia to Egypt and the Middle Eastern area.
So do you think it's possible that this Paracas region, they adopted that region? Why would people settle there?
Well, it's the largest protected bay on the coast of Peru,
Yeah.
which a maritime people would look for. Also, there is, even though it looks desert-like, there is abundant water under the surface, which travels from the Andes westwards into the ocean. So simply a few feet underground, you can tap into streams and rivers. And the Paracas themselves actually made their fields about 2 meters deep so that they were able to access this water without having to irrigate. And even to this very day, it's a very abundant region for the production of fruits and vegetables. So all of the vegetables and fruits we eat here are locally grown, and these fields are thousands of years old.
Yes, and the Paracas aren't an ancient culture, I believe. They existed, what, about 2,000 to 3,000 years ago? Is that right?
The estimate is that they first arrived or appeared 3,000 years ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're able to find remnants older than that, or evidence older. It's just there isn't a lot of archaeological study of the of the Paracas. Or in fact, there isn't much archaeology being done at all at this time. I think it's partly due to the global economic crisis we're going through. But I'm sure there are many sites that have not been fully discovered on the coast of, or this area of the coast of Peru, and much more evidence could be forthcoming.
So as far as the migration patterns go, so we've got this genetic red hair seems to have belonged to this travelling people. How do you think Britain and Ireland and indeed Scotland fit into this, if at all?
I think that, well, they were separate migrations, westward from the Middle East. You still find remainders of people in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, and that area who have natural dark red hair as their bloodline. It's just they've been overrun more or less by, I would guess, darker people, which you find, more or less the history of the world is conquest and invasion by one people on top of another. But our theory is that that the Paracas originally came from a part of the Middle East. They were probably shoved out by a marauding group moving in, and then they probably entered the Red Sea, and then from out of the Red Sea they headed eastwards. Once they got into the Polynesian area, because it's so vast in terms of islands, actually Melanesia would have been first. There are remnants of people there who have red hair and even blonde hair, and they had elongated skulls. And then into Tahiti, you have stories and records of red-haired people there, as well as Hawaii, New Zealand, and then Easter Island, and then from Easter Island to the coast of Peru. And because Easter Island is so small, it could never have had much of a population. But the coast of Peru, if you can tap into the underground water, you can sustain quite a vast society.
Thanks for watching Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World, and we'll see you soon.